Actually, I never wanted to write these books. Since the time I took that journey hitchhiking from London to the Himalayas in India, that was in 1970, 46 years ago. From time to time, I would tell some stories about the journey. And people would say to me, "You should write a book." And I had a very standard and rehearsed answer that really came from my heart. No, I will never write a book. And I had 3 reasons, and I really believed in those reasons. One is, I don't know how to write. I left college after 1 semester and got my advanced education in the caves of the Himalayas. And I was thinking, if I tell the story honestly, no one will believe it. And besides that, isn't it an act of arrogance if I write a whole book about me, where every page is filled with the words I, me, and mine? But then something happened. One of my very dearest friends and brothers, his name Radhanath Swami, he was from nearby Cleveland. He was African American, raised in a very rough ghetto. He would tell me in grade school, to get by, if you were a boy, you had to carry a gun. His mother was a very religious person and imbibed in his heart a very deep faith in spirituality, wherein by humbling oneself to a higher power, we can overcome obstacles miraculously. And he did. Just by his personality, his efforts, he got a full scholarship to Princeton University. This was in the 1960s. He became a civil rights leader. He met Dr. Martin Luther King. After he graduated, he believed very strongly that if he really wanted to help society, he had to have a spiritual connection. And ultimately, he came to the path of bhakti yoga. And we had the same guru, Srila Prabhupada. So we first met, I believe it was in 1973. And I had just come from India back to America because my visa expired. That's a long story. And we just bonded. Many years later, I got a call from him. He was on his deathbed. He had cancer. And the doctors gave him 3 days to live. He would often come here to Detroit and Ann Arbor. But he was in his last days in a little community in Pennsylvania. He asked me to see him. So I drove about 6 hours to his bedside. I'll never forget. When I came, there was a room full of people, maybe about 70 or 80, filling his room. And I knew many of them. Some of those people were very disoriented, disenfranchised from life itself. Skeptics. And he was sitting there, emaciated, thin. He only had one leg, the other was amputated. His body was covered with huge tumors. And he was smiling and answering questions. I saw every single person in the room in total rapt attention, weeping tears of transformation and appreciation. I was transformed just seeing this sight. After he finished his talk, people were coming out of the room, and I saw people falling on the floor in such emotion, saying they've never had a spiritual experience like that in their lives. I went back in the room. I was alone with him. I said, "How did you do that? I've known you for 30 years. I've never seen you do that before. I've never seen anyone do that before." And he smiled. He said, "My prayer is how I could inspire people's lives with God's grace." He said, "I could not ask for a more wonderful opportunity than I have now. Because of my condition and the realizations I'm getting from the condition, I could transform people's consciousness and fill them with God," he calls God Krishna's grace, "more in just a few days than I can do if I were to live another 50 years. What a beautiful blessing this is to be dying." And he meant it. The next day, I went to say goodbye to him because I had a really busy schedule the whole summer with so many events and meetings and commitments and so many places. And just before I was going to say goodbye and offer my love to him, he was laying in his bed. I was sitting in a little chair beside it. He spoke first. He said, "I want to die in your arms. Please stay with me." Now my mind calculated he has 2 more days. I'll adjust. I said, "Maharaj, as long as you're living, I am with you." He lasted 8 more weeks. And I can tell you, that was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. You see, every day we assumed that it could be his last day. So there was no inclination for gossip or politics or any type of relative discussions. It was really serious. We were committed to each other to help, to really infuse that love for God within each other. We spoke hours every day, just the 2 of us. He didn't allow anyone else in the room during that time. And our discussions were so focused and centered on helping each other to remember what's most important in life and what's beyond this physical life. My brothers and sisters, I can speak from my heart. I could have never understood through experience the love that can be between two human beings when God is truly in the center of our relationship. Not in a superficial, in a sectarian way, but really with a sincere effort to help each other. Our hearts became truly like one. One day, as I was sitting at his bedside, he was laying down. He looked up at me and said, "You should write a book about your travels when you were a young man." I really didn't want him to say that. I tried to change the subject. I said, "This is getting materialistic, the subject." He said, "No, this is not materialistic. Why don't you write this book?" And I gave him my 3 reasons. He became very firm. He said, "This is not your story. This is the story of God sending a confused young boy on a quest to find what everyone's looking for. Essentially, a meaningful, fulfilling life. If your story will inspire others, which it will, then it would be an act of arrogance for you not to write it. Promise me on my deathbed that you will write this story and publish it." I didn't say anything. I really didn't want to write this story. He said, "You cannot refuse a man on his deathbed." I got kind of caught up in the emotion of that moment. And I promised him. And after I promised, he grabbed my hand and squeezed it and smiled, a beaming, effulgent smile with tears glistening in his eyes, and said, "You cannot lie to a man on his deathbed." Anyways, I decided when I left the room, within the days to come, I'm going to somehow or other convince him to let me withdraw that promise. But God took him away. So in honor of Bhakti Tirtha Swami, who very much loved the people of Detroit and Michigan, I wrote this book, The Journey Home. And afterward, I got trapped again. I'm not going to tell the whole story, into writing a book on many of the lessons and teachings of the tradition that I discovered. It's the tradition of Bhakti Yoga. The word yoga is Sanskrit. It means to unite, union, harmony. Interesting, religio is the Latin root of the word religion, which means essentially the same thing, to bind back. Both terms refer to reconnecting to our true self. Yoga is the art, the science, the lifestyle of harmonizing the body, the mind, with the living force, our true self. The Bhagavad Gita, a great yoga scripture, declares, "Nahanyate hanyamane saridi, najayate mriyate vakadachit." That this living force, who we really are, that's seeing through the eyes and hearing through the ears, is witnessing the various changes of the body, from childhood to youth to old age, and then death. Similarly, the mind is always changing. Do you remember when you were a little baby craving for your mother's milk? When was the last time you had that craving? So your mind is completely changed. Who is it that's witnessing all these changes? It's the changeless, everlasting self, the Atma or soul. What is the nature of the soul? It is unborn and undying. Satchit Ananda, eternal, full of knowledge, and full of happiness. What is the happiness that is inherent within us? It's to experience the infinite, timeless love of the Supreme Soul, the Paramatma, or God, and to reciprocate in whatever situation we're in by being an instrument of that love, and to see everything through the lens of that love, and to see everyone in that way. When the mind and the body are in harmony with the soul, we realize the soul's harmony with the Supreme Soul. In Bhagavad Gita, God is named Krishna. He has many names. And when that connection is made, it is said in the Vedas that when you water the root of the tree, the water extends to every part of the tree. When we awaken that dormant natural love that's within us, then it extends in the form of compassion and respect for the soul in every living being. Then we see all of the ecology, the environment, as divine property, sacred property. And we see every living being as a child of the same source. Vidyavanaya sampani brahmani kabihastini suni chaiva svapake cha pandita samadarshana. The Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells that true wisdom is to see every living being with equal vision. Whether one is white or black or brown or yellow, whether one is Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist or Jain or Sikh or Zoroastrian or agnostic or atheist, East or West, male or female, rich or poor. The Gita goes on to explain whether one is a human or a cat or a dog or an elephant or a cow. When we understand the sacredness of the life that is within ourselves, who we are, and we realize how we are a part of the supremely beautiful, merciful, loving source, or Krishna, or God, then we could see that everyone is our brothers and sisters. And then whether we are doctors or lawyers or engineers, or whether we're selling Fords or Chevrolets or Chryslers, or Toyotas, whether we are farmers or politicians, mothers, fathers, educators, or monks, whatever skills we have, whatever resources we have, our great joy in life is in sharing the love of our hearts through whatever we have and whoever we are. That's the joy of living, because it's natural living. I write in this book, The Journey Within, many stories that really helped me to understand in a deeper way basic, simple truths. Some years ago, I was leading a pilgrimage in a place called Vrindavan. Vrindavan is about 90 miles southeast of Delhi, and it's the place where Krishna appeared in this world 5,000 years ago. And there's thousands and thousands of temples, little ashrams. It's on the banks of the river Yamuna. And in those days, it was very much a forest and pastures. It was just beautiful. So I was taking several thousand people around for several weeks. And I was really tired. So I got to the Delhi airport and I was sitting and I just wanted to be left alone. And while I was waiting for my flight, a lady came up and said, the minister for the federal government of India for forestry and the environment wants to speak to you. No, I've had challenges with visas, so I didn't want to disappoint such a person. I said, of course, I'd be happy to speak to her. And she came up, very gracious. Namaste, Swamiji. I said, Namaste, Mataji. And then she became very stern. What are you yogis and babas and sadhus doing for the environment? You are sitting in your ashrams and in your caves and in your forest and temples and you're meditating and you're praying and you're chanting all these mantras. What are you doing for the environment? Every day, there's tons of poison filling our rivers, our lakes, the ocean, the land, the air. It's a crisis. What are you doing? I really got enlivened by her challenge because I had to ask myself, what am I doing? And I said a little prayer, and then I responded. I said, it certainly is beyond any sectarian differences. We all have to come together for these very, very unifying needs of the world today. Because factually, whoever we are, rich or poor, influential or whatever, we're all depending on the same air and the same earth for food and the same sources of water. But then I said to her that if a doctor sees a patient who has boils covering their body, then it's necessary to treat the symptoms of those boils with some compresses or some salve. But however many times you cure a symptom, it's necessary that you also try to address the root cause. If in the case of these boils, there's an infection in the blood, we need to simultaneously do that. What is the root cause of all the cruelty that people have with each other? What is the cause of this tendency to exploit the resources of God's nature? It's a pollution within the ecology of the human heart. The heart is infected with toxic greed, envy, arrogance, selfishness. And the principle of yoga, the principle of spirituality, is to clean the heart. I cited a very wonderful analogy that my guru Srila Prabhupada spoke in 1966, 50 years ago from this year. He said, when water falls from the sky, it's clean. It's transparent. But when it comes in contact with the ground, it becomes muddy and loses its transparency. But when we filter that water, we bring it back to its natural quality. Similarly, our consciousness, our hearts, are originally pure. But somehow or other, due to circumstances, according to the Vedic literatures, that may have spanned for many, many births, as well as the choices we make throughout our life in this lifetime, we accumulate so many of these toxins, misconceptions. When yogis and sadhus and babas and monks, when they are meditating, when they are chanting these mantras, if they're doing it for the proper purpose, it's to cleanse the heart, to actually go to the very root cause and clean the ecology of consciousness, and to inspire others to do the same. Karuna is a Sanskrit word. It's often translated as compassion. But compassion not just as a feeling for the suffering of others, but karuna is compassion that is active, intelligent, thoughtful, committed, where we're willing to not only feel, but express it through our thoughts, our words, and our actions. I said to her, I predict, if you were able through policies to clean every river, lake, the ground, and the air, if people's hearts aren't cleaned, it's all going to be polluted again. We need to do these things side by side. Then by God's grace, I was called for my flight. And she said, yes, Swamiji, what you're saying is true. We should work together. So that was nice. Fear is born of a disconnect from our true self. Depression, lack of self-esteem, and also arrogance and the obsessive need to think that I have rights over others. They are all due to a disconnect. I'd like to share one little story from the journey home. When I was about 20 years old on my search, before I found this path of bhakti, I was in Nepal, in an area called Radhanath. It's in the Kathmandu Valley. I was sitting under a beautiful tree. If I remember, it was a banyan tree, and I was meditating. It was the monsoon rainy season, so it was very beautiful environment. Dark, indigo clouds, like a little mist. It wasn't raining that day, but you could really smell the moisture of the clouds, and everything was growing so luxuriously. I was sitting with my eyes closed, meditating. It was so nice, it was so peaceful. Suddenly, I thought, what is that? Because I was in a very secluded place. And I opened my eyes. I saw this very gigantic European man walking. And he had big shoes on. And he was trampling the leaves. He was making a lot of noise. He was huge. Not just tall, but he had giant muscles. He was obviously a bodybuilder. He had a big bag of groceries in his arm, and he was walking. So I offered my respects and closed my eyes and went back into meditation. A few seconds later, I hear this noise. So I open my eyes. I see that this European bodybuilder was surrounded by a circle of tiny little brown monkeys. They were small monkeys, too. I've seen big monkeys in my life, but these were little monkeys. And they were closing in on him. They were showing their teeth. Monkeys have sharp teeth. They were going, and they were looking at him really mean. And I just looked, and before closing my eyes again, I saw this person pick up a giant rock. He had his groceries in one arm, and with this rock, he started howling, rah, like a warrior, and threatening to pulverize these little monkeys with the rock. The monkeys were not fazed. They came closer and closer. This was better than my meditation. I really wanted to see how this was going to conclude. This was like David and Goliath or something. I saw this person. He was so angry at these monkeys, and he was threatening them. But they had no fear whatsoever. They were screeching louder and making their lips curl up even more, so every tooth in their mouths was showing. And they started taking these little leaps toward him, like, Suddenly, this man was terrified. He dropped the rock. He stood trembling in fear. And one little monkey just walked right up to him and took the entire bag of groceries out of his arms. And he gave no resistance. And the monkeys didn't even care. They just went in a circle around the bag to eat what was inside. And they couldn't care less about him. They turned their back to him. It was quite amazing. That giant of a human ran away in the other direction as fast as he could. And I was thinking, that was incredible. I closed my eyes to meditate. A few seconds later, I heard the monkeys are screaming. I opened my eyes again. There was a little Nepalese boy. He was perhaps 7 or 8 years old, maybe less. He was skipping. He was skipping through the field like, universal principle of little children, they skip. And he was just from a village. And the monkeys were looking at him, really concerned. And the little boy picked up a tiny stone and started running at the monkeys. And the monkeys, and they ran in all directions and started hiding in trees and left the bag of groceries there. And he sat at the bag of groceries to start eating it. And the monkeys were distant places hiding, watching him in fear. I was thinking, what am I supposed to learn from this episode? We are afraid of what we do not know. That European man may have had giant physical strength, but he wasn't familiar with monkeys. So the monkeys, they understood his weakness. Those little monkeys were nothing physically in compared to him. But they knew his weakness was his fear of them. And they just focused on that and completely defeated him. The little child, who was probably hardly the weight of the biceps of that man, he lived with monkeys all his life. He had no fear of them. Because he had no fear of them, they were afraid of him. In the world we live, there's so much fear. Fear of death. Fear of losing loved ones. Fear of losing wealth. Of poverty. Fear of disease. Fear of other people. Fear of what people will think of us or what they'll say of us. There's limitless reasons to have fear in this world. The Bhagavad Gita tells that the origin is avidya, that we're disconnected from the immortal nature of our own soul. We're disconnected from the limitless, from awareness of the limitless love of God that is forever our inheritance. We're constantly being bombarded by weapons of mass distraction. Yoga, religion, spirituality is to focus us in once again on our greatest wealth, our greatest treasure, the immortal nature of the soul, and to experience through awakening the love of the soul, the love for God, the love for all beings, and the awareness of our relationship with everything. Then there's no fear. Then we deal with situations as effectively as possible. There's a story of a bird called a crane. Stands on one long leg. It's a white bird and looks down into a stream and sees so many little fish swimming by and just watches. Dozens of fish, hundreds of little fish. Patient. When a big fish comes, he eats it. Now, I don't eat fish, but cranes eat fish. The lesson of this story is the crane is not being distracted by the little things. He's focused on what's really important. Unless we have an awareness of what's really, truly important in life, who really am I? What really is the greatest most significant purpose of my life? What is the real change? Big or small is not important. But what change can I create in the service of others? Who is God? How to awaken that love and be an instrument of that love. These are the big issues. And when we're focused on the big issues of life, then the little things don't really disturb us. But if we're not focused on what's really important, then all these little distractions become so apparently significant, they could really agitate us. Param dristva nivartate, Krishna tells in Gita. When we experience the higher reality of our soul and God's grace, then we're not disturbed. So we deal with the things of this world in an effective way, in a compassionate way, but we're not disturbed by them. We're disturbed when we're not experiencing that higher inner reality. So I was thinking of all these things as I'm watching this little boy sitting there with the groceries and all the monkeys in total fear of him. And he saw me. Now I have to humble myself to tell this part of the story. That little boy, he brought a bunch of bananas right out of that shopping bag and brought them to give to me. Because he saw I'm kind of like a yogi sitting there, so he wanted to give me some charity. As soon as he went to give me those bananas, I saw all the monkeys celebrating. They were going, I said, no, I don't want these bananas. I said, no, but, Kila, nay. And he was saying, yes, please. And he gave me bananas. And then when he picked up the bag and walked away, all the monkeys started coming at me. And I realized, I was sitting there in a very philosophical way, but I had more in common with that European than I did with that little boy. So what I did is I took all those bananas and was it in fear, was it in charity or compassion? I'll let you be the judge. I threw all the bananas to the monkeys. And they were very happy. And I was very happy. And I'm still talking about it 45 years later. But this chanting of God's names, prayer, meditation, associating with people who really inspire us and enlighten us is such an important part of our life because it helps us to access the true wealth, the true health that's within us. And that is what we describe in this book that was released today as the journey within. Thank you very much.